Okay, let's unpack this. Seriously, have you ever looked at something totally ordinary, like maybe the chair you're sitting on right now, or the table, and just for a second wondered if you really knew what it was?
Yeah.
Not just how it looks right here, right now.
Yeah, from your angle, in this light.
Exactly. But what it actually is.
Yeah.
And maybe felt your brain do a little philosophical wobble.
Yeah. That simple doubt, it can really unravel things, can't it? Assumptions we make constantly.
It really can. And that's a classic philosophical starting point, isn't it? Questioning the obvious.
It absolutely is, and that's precisely where this deep dive is headed. You've given us a fantastic source text here, a real classic that tackles these big questions head on. Knowledge, reality.
Right. So think of this as our guided tour. We're going through the material you brought us, trying to pull out the key insights together.
Sounds good.
We want to get a handle on that difference between, well, appearance and reality, what things seem to be versus what they are.
And what we can genuinely truly know.
Yeah, and maybe shake up some of those everyday beliefs about the world, about ourselves. We'll navigate it together.
Okay, so the source kicks off with those things that feel incredibly certain, right? Sitting here, seeing a table, looking out the window, buildings, the sun.
Stuff you don't normally question.
Exactly. We think the sun's huge, miles away, rises every day. We assume other people see the same things. It just feels, well, obvious.
Like bedrock reality. Why even talk about it?
But the text immediately says, hold on, all of that. It can be reasonably doubted. It needs a closer look to see if any of it counts as actual knowledge.
And the perfect way to see why is that simple table example.
Right. From one spot, it's, say, oblong, brown, maybe a bit shiny. Touch it smooth, cool, hard. Tap it.
You get that wooden sound.
Yeah, and if someone else is there, they probably agree, more or less.
But here's where it gets tricky. You move a bit, or the light changes, and suddenly the color looks different. The shape might seem different too.
And the source makes a great point about painters. They actually have to unlearn seeing things the common sense way.
How so?
They have to train themselves to see just the patches of color, the shapes exactly as they appear from their specific viewpoint in that specific light. Not the table, but the appearance.
Ah, okay. And that pulls out the big philosophical distinction the source is driving at. Appearance versus reality.
Exactly. What seems to be versus what is. The painter focuses on appearance. Most of us, practically speaking, just assume appearance is reality.
But the philosopher steps back and says, wait a minute. It's not quite that simple.
Right. So if the color looks different depending on where I stand or how the light hits it.
Which one is the real color? Is it brown? Dark brown? Light brown?
The source argues, well, maybe there isn't one single color that is the table's inherent color. The colors we see are a result of the table, yes, but also the light and us looking.
So when we say it's brown, we usually just mean like under normal conditions for a normal observer.
Pretty much. But those other colors you see under different conditions, they're just as real as appearances.
Okay.
So to be fair to all appearances, maybe you have to conclude the table itself doesn't strictly have a color in the way we experience color.
And the source says this applies to texture too, and sound, and how warm or cool it feels.
Yep. All these qualities seem to depend on our senses, our perspective. They're not just in the object unchanging.
Okay. So the things we know immediately through our senses, that specific patch of brown, the cool feeling, the sound, the text calls these sense data.
Exactly. Sense data.
And the crucial point is, the table isn't just these sense data. And the sense data aren't directly properties of the table itself.
That's the core distinction. The real table, the thing the source calls the physical object out there.
We don't see that directly.
No, it's something we infer it from the sense data we get. I get these visual sensations, these touch sensations, and my mind says, probably a table causing these.
Which, okay, immediately throws up those two huge, slightly unnerving questions the source puts forward. One, is there actually a real table? Matter out there at all, separate from our minds. And two, if there is, what's it actually like? What's its real nature?
And matter here means something non-mental, occupying space, incapable of thought.
Right. And this is where philosophers start to disagree, naturally. The source brings up Bishop Berkeley's idealism.
Which is pretty radical stuff, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
He basically says there's no such thing as matter independent of mind. The world, for Berkeley, is just minds and their ideas. And ideas here basically means sense data.
So, when I look at the table, I'm not seeing a physical thing, I'm just having table ideas.
In a sense, yes.
But what happens when I leave the room? Does the table just poof, vanish?
That's the classic objection. Berkeley's answer was clever, though. He said, what we call seeing the table is a sign of something independent of my mind, sure, but that something isn't non-mental matter.
Okay. So what is it then? He believed the real table, the one that persists when no human is looking, is an idea in the mind of God.
Ah, so it's independent of us because it's always being thought by God.
Exactly. That gives it permanence, makes it independent of your mind or mine. But it's still fundamentally mental, just part of the ultimate mind.
Okay, so the universe as God's ongoing thought. Interesting. But the source critiques this.
It does. It suggests Berkeley might be confusing two different things. The thing you apprehend, like the brown color, and the act of apprehending it, the mental process of seeing.
Okay, unpack that a bit. Why is that a problem?
Well, the act of seeing is definitely mental. It happens in your mind. But the source argues the color itself, the quality of brownness, isn't necessarily mental just because you perceive it. Its existence might depend on, light hitting an object and interacting with your eye, but that doesn't automatically make the brownness itself a thought or a part of your mind.
Right, like knowing about Paris doesn't put Paris inside my head. The knowing is mental, Paris isn't.
Exactly that analogy. The thought is mental, the thing thought about can be independent.
Makes sense. So what's the alternative view? The one that, most people kind of assume.
Well, the source calls it the common sense view, which most philosophers also lean towards. It's rational to believe our sense data are signs.
Signs of what?
Signs of something independent of us, those physical objects we mentioned. And these objects cause our sensations. This independent something is what we call matter.
But we can't absolutely prove it exists.
The source admits, no, you can't prove it with absolute logical certainty starting only from your own sensations. But it's presented as the most reasonable inference, the best explanation for why our experiences are consistent and patterned the way they are.
And science seems to back this up, right? The idea of an external material world. But it describes it different.
Very differently. Science talks about matter in terms of properties like position, mass, motion, energy states, stuff like that.
Not brownness or hardness.
Right. Science might say light waves of certain frequencies hit the object, reflect, enter your eye, and that process causes the sensation you call brown. The waves themselves aren't brown. Color is the effect in us.
And space, too. Science's space isn't the same as the space I see or feel.
Crucially different, according to the source. We experience visual space, tactile space. They feel different and we learn to connect them. But physical space, the space of science, is conceived as this single neutral container where all physical objects, including our bodies, exist.
Okay.
It's the arrangement of objects in that physical space relative to your body in physical space that determines the sense data you experience in your private sensory spaces.
So the physical table out there has scientific properties, which then cause the sense data, the brownness and hardness, that appear in my mind.
That's the model, yes. And it works for time, too. The thunder and lightning example is great here.
Oh, yeah.
Physically, the light flash and the sound wave start at roughly the same time and place in physical space. But we see the lightning first, then hear the thunder, because light travels faster than sound.
So our sense data arrive delayed,
Yeah.
based on physical laws in physical space and time.
Exactly. The physical event is simultaneous, the perceived events are sequential.
Okay, this separation. My immediate world of sense data on one side and this inferred physical world described by science on the other, it feels a bit detached, a little isolating.
It does raise that uncomfortable possibility, doesn't it? Maybe it is all just in my head. Maybe I'm just experiencing a very elaborate, very consistent dream or simulation.
Which leads to solipsism.
Yeah.
The idea that maybe only my mind exists.
The source calls it being alone in a desert.
Yeah, that's not a happy thought.
No. And the text acknowledges, look, you can't logically disprove solipsism starting from only your own experience, but
Quickly adds.
there's not the slightest positive reason to actually believe it's true. It's a theoretical possibility, but not one we have any evidence for.
Okay, so if we can't logically prove there's an external world or other minds based just on our own private sense data, why are we so convinced they exist?
The source argues it's fundamentally instinctive. It's a belief that doesn't come from logical deduction.
You can't use other people's testimony as proof either, can you? Because their words just come to you as more sense data, sounds, sights.
Exactly. You'd first have to assume those sounds came from an independent mind to use them as evidence for an independent mind. It's circular.
Right, the circularity trap.
But That instinctive belief in an external world and other minds, it offers something incredibly valuable.
Which is?
Simplicity. Think about the cat example the source uses.
Okay.
If the cat is just my sense data, it pops into existence when I see it, vanishes when I look away. So how does it get hungry when I'm not looking?
Huh. Yeah, that gets complicated fast. You need increasingly bizarre explanations.
Totally. Whereas just believing there's an independent cat that keeps existing and gets hungry whether I see it or not.
It is way, way simpler.
Yeah.
And makes sense of its behavior.
Precisely. And with other people. It feels almost impossible not to interpret their actions and speech as signs of thoughts and feelings similar to our own. It's just a much more powerful and simple explanation for everything we experience than assuming they're just complex patterns of sense data with no mind behind them.
Okay. So even if it's not strictly provable for my own private world, the instinctive belief in an external reality and other minds is strong. And it provides the simplest explanation for the patterns we observe.
Yes, and the source suggests philosophy's job isn't necessarily to prove it from the ground up, but maybe to organize these instinctive beliefs, see which ones are the strongest, see if they fit together harmoniously.
And accept that system while still acknowledging, yeah, maybe there's a tiny possibility of error somewhere.
Exactly. Isolate the core instincts from just habits, see if they cohere. If they do, that system is worth accepting.
Okay, right. So I've gone from the shaky ground to the obvious to appearance versus inferred reality. Now let's get more into how we actually know stuff. The source talks about a foundation for certainty.
It does. It locates that foundation in our own immediate conscious experiences. Your thoughts right now, your feelings, your sensations, the sense data.
That stuff I'm directly aware of.
Yes. Even if you're dreaming or hallucinating, the source says you are absolutely certain that you are having those sensations, those thoughts right now. That immediate awareness has a kind of primitive certainty.
So even if I doubt the table exists out there, I can't doubt that I'm currently experiencing the sense data of, say, brownness and hardness.
That's the idea. That's the solid basis. The tough part, as we saw, is building reliable knowledge beyond that basis, knowledge about an external world, or general truths.
And the source gives us two main ways we know things. There's knowledge by acquaintance.
Right. Acquaintance is direct awareness. You're acquainted with the specific color patch you're seeing now, the feeling of the chair, your own feeling of, say, curiosity. It's immediate, non-inferential. You just know it directly.
Okay. And the other way is knowledge by description.
Yes. That's knowing that there is something fitting a certain description, even if you're not directly acquainted with the thing itself.
Like the physical table again.
Exactly. It's known by description as the physical object which causes such and such sense data. You know about it through its relationship to things you are acquainted with, namely the sense data.
The source uses examples like the Emperor of China or Bismarck, historical figures.
Right. You can know lots of true things about Bismarck, the first chancellor of the German Empire, involved in unifying Germany, etc., based on descriptions you've read or heard. But unless you're a time traveler, you weren't personally acquainted with the man himself.
And lots of words we use, even names, function as descriptions.
Yeah, Bismarck points to the unique individual who fits all those descriptions we know. Our knowledge often involves knowing that different descriptions all point to the same thing, even if that thing isn't directly present to our senses.
Okay. So knowing things starts with direct acquaintance sense data, ourselves, and then we build out massively using description and inference.
That's the picture. Now, what about knowing truths? Not just things, but propositions, statements. The source makes another distinction here. Intuitive versus derivative knowledge.
Intuitive knowledge.
Yeah.
Like truths that just seem obviously true.
Yeah.
Self-evident.
Exactly. Self-evident truths. This includes simple statements about your current sense data. I am aware of a blue color. It also covers fundamental principles of logic, like something cannot both be true and false at the same time.
And basic arithmetic, like
Yeah.
2 + 2 = 4.
Yes, that's considered intuitively known. The source also tentatively includes some basic ethical principles, like pain is bad, but admits those are maybe less certain than logic.
Okay. And derivative knowledge.
That's knowledge you get by logically deducing it from intuitively known truths. Think of a mathematical proof. You start with axioms or definitions you accept as intuitively true, and use logical steps, which are also intuitively valid, to reach a conclusion.
Okay. Intuitive derivative. That covers logic and immediate experience. But what about, well, most of what we think we know? Like, why am I sure the sun will rise tomorrow? Why do I trust that this bread will nourish me and not poison me?
Now we had a really big one, the problem of induction.
Induction, meaning generalizing from past experience.
Exactly. Why believe the sun will rise? Because it always has.
Yeah.
Why trust the bread? Because bread like this has always been nourishing in the past. We assume the future will resemble the past based on observed regularities.
Which seems completely reasonable. It's how science works, how we live our lives.
It's absolutely fundamental, instinctive, practical. But here's the philosophical catch the source lays out. You cannot logically prove that the future must resemble the past, just based on past observations.
Why not?
Because any attempt to justify the principle of induction, the future will resemble the past, by appealing to its past success, well, that assumes the principle of induction is reliable to make the argument.
Oh, right. It's circular. You're using induction to prove induction. Like saying, my memory is reliable because I remember it always being reliable.
Precisely. The source has that great, if slightly grim, example of the chicken.
The chicken.
Yeah, the chicken gets fed every single morning by the farmer. It forms a very strong inductive belief. Farmer appears, food follows. Totally reliable, based on all past experience.
Until
Until the day the farmer appears and wrings its neck instead. The past regularity didn't logically guarantee the future outcome.
Okay, wow. So the principle of induction, the idea that patterns will continue, which underlies basically all our expectations about the world, science included.
It has to be accepted on what the source calls intrinsic evidence. It just seems self-evidently true to us, or at least highly probable. But it can't be logically derived from something more basic or proven by experience without that circularity.
So if you don't accept the principle of induction,
You basically have no rational basis to believe anything about what you haven't directly experienced. Not the future, not the past beyond your memory, not even what's happening outside this room right now.
that's a pretty fundamental leap of faith we all just make, instinctively.
Seems so. It's a belief held with a very high degree of confidence, the source suggests, but it reveals a limit to what pure logic and experience can strictly guarantee.
What about things like logic and math themselves? 2 plus 2, 4 feels different from the sun will rise. It feels necessary. Is that based on experience?
This brings us to a priori knowledge. Knowledge known independently of experience.
Before experience.
Sort of, not necessarily chronologically before, but justifiable without needing empirical evidence. Historically, you had empiricists saying all knowledge comes from experience, and rationalists saying we have innate ideas or principles we know prior to experience.
And where does this source land?
It sides more with the rationalists here. It argues that principles of logic. If P implies Q and P is true, then Q is true. And mathematics are known a priori. You don't learn the rules of logic by observing lots of valid arguments. You use those rules to reason about anything, including experiences.
So I don't confirm 2 plus 2 to 4 by counting pairs of apples over and over again.
Experience might trigger your understanding. Seeing 2 apples and 2 more apples might help you grasp the abstract principle 2 plus 2 to 4. But the certainty of that truth doesn't rest on those specific apples. You grasp the relationship between the abstract concepts 2 and 4.
What was Kant's take on this? The source mentioned him briefly.
Yeah. Kant had this influential idea that our minds aren't just passive receivers of information. He thought our minds actively structure our experience using innate categories like space, time, and causality.
So we know things a priori because our mind imposes that structure.
That was his explanation. A priori knowledge is knowledge of the structure our own minds impose on reality. It tells us how experience must appear to us, given our mental setup.
But the source wasn't fully convinced by Kant.
It offers a quick critique. If a priori knowledge depends on our mental structure, couldn't that structure theoretically be different? Or change? Does that guarantee absolute necessity? The source leans towards a perhaps simpler view. Maybe we just directly apprehend these necessary truths themselves.
Okay. Interesting philosophical debate there. But back to a priori knowledge like math and logic. Can it tell us about what actually exists in the world?
The source is pretty clear on this. No. A priori knowledge is about relationships between concepts or possibilities. It's fundamentally hypothetical.
Meaning
It can tell you things like, if something is a triangle, it must have 3 sides. But it can't tell you, just by logic alone, that any triangles actually exist in the physical world.
Right. So any knowledge that asserts actual existence
Has to have an empirical component. It has to be connected back to experience, to acquaintance with existing things at some point.
That distinction between 2 plus 2, 4, and, say, all humans are mortal really drives this home.
Exactly. All humans are mortal is something we know from vast experience, but we can imagine it being false. We can conceive of immortal humans.
But 2 plus 2 is 4. It feels like it has to be true in any possible world.
Right. It has that quality of necessity. It's not just true here and now. It feels fundamentally true.
And understanding these necessary truths, the source says, involves something called universals.
Yes, universals. A priori knowledge, the source argues, deals with entities that don't exist in the same way particulars like tables or chairs exist. These are things like qualities.
Like whiteness or hardness.
Exactly. And also relations, like north of, greater than, similar to. These abstract concepts or properties that can be shared by many different particular things are called universals. The source connects this idea back to Plato's forms.
Okay, so a particular is, like the specific white patch I'm seeing right now. The universal is whiteness itself, the quality that this patch shares with, say, a piece of paper or snow.
Precisely. And the source points out that most words in our language, adjective, white, verbs, prepositions, under, actually stand for universals. Only proper names, Socrates, and maybe demonstratives point directly to particulars.
But we tend to overlook the universals.
We often do. We focus on the concrete things. The source suggests that neglecting the reality of universals, especially relations.
Relations like similarity or before and after.
Yeah. Ignoring those can lead to philosophical problems, like how can things interact? How can they be compared? How can we even form general statements? The source argues that relations, like resemblance, are undeniably real universals.
But where are these universals? Are they in space and time like the table?
The source says no. They don't exist in space and time in the same way particulars do. They have a different kind of reality, which it sometimes calls subsistence.
Subsistence.
Yeah, like the relation north of between Edinburgh and London, that relation subsists. It's real. It's true regardless of whether anyone is thinking about it. But the relation itself isn't in Edinburgh or in London. It's not a physical thing, nor is it just a thought in someone's head. It's an abstract reality.
Okay. And can we be acquainted with these universals, like we are with sense data?
The source says yes. We become acquainted with universals like whiteness or similarity by experiencing many particular white things or similar things, and then abstracting the common quality or relation.
So we notice the common feature across different experiences.
Right. And crucially, we can also be acquainted with relations between universals themselves, like knowing that the universal 3 is greater than the universal 2. This is key for understanding logic and math.
Ah, and that's the connection. All a priori knowledge, like logic and math.
Deals exclusively with the relations between universals.
It doesn't depend on observing particular instances in the world.
Correct. To know 2 plus 2 is 4, you need to be acquainted with the universals 2 and 4, and the relation equals applied in this way. You don't need to count endless pairs of objects.
Okay, wow. That clarifies the a priori stuff a lot. So we've got acquaintance and description for things, intuitive and derivative knowledge for truths, plus the whole induction problem, and this idea of a priori knowledge dealing with universals. Let's nail down the definitions now. What is truth, according to this source?
Okay, truth. It's not defined as just a property of a belief itself, like being consistent or useful. Truth depends on the belief's relation to something outside the belief.
And belief itself is seen as a relation too, right?
Yes, a complex one. A belief isn't just between a mind and one idea. It's a relation between a mind and several things, the different parts of the belief.
Like the Othello example, believing Desdemona loves Cassio.
Exactly. The belief involves Othello, the believer, but also Desdemona, Cassio, and the relation loving. The mind relates these components together in the act of believing.
Okay, so how does truth come in? Is it about correspondence?
Precisely. A belief is true if and only if there is a corresponding complex or fact in reality, formed by the objects of the belief, or the terms, actually being united by the relation that the belief asserts.
So if Othello's belief is true,
it's because the complex Desdemona loving Cassio actually exists as a fact in the world, independent of Othello's mind. If Desdemona doesn't love Cassio, that fact doesn't exist, and Othello's belief is false.
So my belief the table is brown is true if there's a corresponding fact out there involving the physical table and the property that causes my brown sense data. The truth maker is external.
That's the correspondence theory of truth being presented, yes. The truth depends on the way things are outside the belief itself.
Got it. And knowledge isn't just having a true belief, right? The source had those examples of guessing correctly.
Right. You might guess the prime minister's name starts with B and be right by luck, but you didn't know it. Or you read something in a notoriously unreliable newspaper that happens to be true, still not knowledge.
So what else is needed?
Knowledge requires that the true belief is connected, in the right way, back to some form of intuitive knowledge. It's either intuitive itself, or it's derived from intuitive knowledge through valid reasoning, even if you didn't consciously go through all the logical steps, like trusting reliable testimony. There needs to be a proper grounding.
And how certain is that foundational intuitive knowledge? You mentioned self-evidence earlier.
Yeah, the source talks about degrees of self-evidence. Some intuitive beliefs feel incredibly certain, luminously evident, like your awareness of your current thoughts, or maybe basic logical principles.
And others are less certain, like memory.
Exactly. Memory gives us intuitive knowledge of the past, but the certainty varies hugely. You're very sure about a loud bang that just happened. You're much less sure about the exact details of a conversation last week.
And we tend to trust the beliefs with higher degrees of self-evidence more.
That seems reasonable, yes. The source even suggests that perhaps all knowledge has some tiny degree of doubt attached, but the degree of self-evidence is our best guide to how trustworthy a belief is.
So we end up with these categories. Knowledge is a firm, true belief that's properly grounded in intuition. Error is a firm belief that's false. And then there's probable opinion.
Right. Probable opinion covers beliefs that aren't firmly held, or maybe beliefs that are true but lacked that solid grounding, or beliefs based on evidence that only makes them likely, not certain, like induction. They have a lower degree of self-evidence.
And just collecting lots of probable opinions doesn't magically turn them into certainty.
No, organizing probabilities doesn't create indubitable knowledge.
Okay. This leads us nicely to the end game. The value of doing philosophy in the first place. Lots of people probably come to it hoping for big answers, proofs of God, maybe, or that the universe is ultimately good.
That's a common hope. But the source we're looking at suggests that expectation might be, well, largely misplaced.
Why?
Because, from this perspective, philosophy cannot give us certain knowledge about the universe as a whole just by using a priori metaphysical reasoning. Grand philosophical systems that try to do this, like Hegel's is mentioned, they often fail, according to the source, because they make assumptions we can't justify. Maybe they assume things can exist independently of being known, or confuse knowing about something with knowing its entire nature. They overreach what pure reason can deliver about reality itself.
So philosophy isn't about building the one true system that explains everything.
Not according to this view. Its primary value lies elsewhere. It's seen more as a criticism of knowledge.
Criticism? How so?
It involves examining the foundations, the justifications for all our beliefs, especially the ones that seem most obvious, like we did with the table.
Questioning things like whether physical objects really are just like our sense data.
Exactly. It sifts through our beliefs, challenges the poorly grounded ones. It doesn't necessarily demand we reject everything, but it aims to hold on to only those beliefs that can withstand that kind of critical scrutiny.
And, kind of surprisingly, the source argues that a big part of philosophy's value is in the uncertainty it generates.
Yes, it's a key point. Science often gives us definite answers, building up knowledge. Philosophy, by questioning the assumptions behind even science and common sense, shakes up that feeling of certainty about the definite, finite, obvious world.
And that's good.
It's seen as incredibly valuable, because by questioning assumptions, philosophy reveals possibilities we hadn't even considered. It expands our imagination about what could be true. It makes us less dogmatic, less trapped by habit and prejudice.
So, less certainty about what is, but more knowledge about what might be.
Beautifully put. It frees the mind from the tyranny of custom.
That's a really different way to think about the goal. It's not finding the answer, but expanding the possibilities through questioning.
And this leads to what the source calls philosophic contemplation, or the philosophic life.
Which is?
It's about trying to escape the narrow confines of our purely personal, instinctive interests. You know, just focusing on me, my friends, my immediate needs and wants.
Getting beyond the self-centered view.
Exactly, and entering a wider perspective by contemplating the world, or parts of it, impartially, trying to see things as they are, in their own right, without constantly relating them back to ourself.
And how does this contemplation enlarge the self, as the source puts it?
Knowledge itself is described as a kind of union between the self and the not-self, everything outside the self. This enlargement happens best, the source argues, when our desire for knowledge is pure.
Pure meaning?
Meaning we adapt ourselves to understand the object rather than trying to force the object to fit our pre-existing beliefs or desires. Trying to make the world conform to us is seen as a form of self-assertion that actually limits our growth.
So true contemplation finds value in understanding the not-self, the object, the world for its own sake, appreciating its complexity and independence from us.
Yes, finding satisfaction not just in what the world does for us, but in the inherent greatness and intricacy of the world itself.
And this impartial attitude, gained through thinking philosophically, you can spill over into life.
The source suggests it can. The freedom and impartiality learned in contemplation can potentially influence our actions and emotions. It helps us see our own desires and goals as, perhaps, very small parts of a much larger whole. It fosters a sense of perspective.
So it's a way to live less driven by immediate instinct with a broader, calmer view.
An escape from the beleaguered fortress of the purely self-centered life, as the source vividly puts it. It's not necessarily easy, but it offers a path towards a richer, more expansive way of experiencing the world.
Wow. Okay, so we really traced a path there from just questioning a table all the way through appearance versus reality, different kinds of knowledge, the huge challenge of induction, the world of universal, what truth and knowledge might be.
And ending up with this quite profound idea about the value of philosophy itself lying in uncertainty, possibility, and impartial contemplation.
It's quite a journey, drawing all these threads from the source material you provided, from our immediate sense data to the inferred physical world, the limits of certainty, and the power of asking these fundamental questions.
Hopefully exploring it this way has sparked some new ways for you, the listener, to think about concepts you might normally just take for granted.
Yeah, like how you know anything at all, really, or what real even means. That whole complex dance between your mind and everything else.
And reinforcing that idea. Philosophy's power maybe isn't always in giving the final, definitive answer. Sometimes it's in changing the questions you ask, equipping you with tools for critical thinking, and just broadening your whole perspective.
Which leaves us with a final thought to chew on, drawing from that idea of the value of questioning and contemplating the not-self. What if the real point of wrestling with these deep questions about reality, appearance, knowledge, isn't necessarily to arrive at one fixed destination, one final answer?
Go on.
What if, instead, the purpose is to use the very vastness and uncertainty of the not-self, the universe out there, independent of us, with all its strangeness and possibility, as the means to continually push the boundaries of our own understanding? Maybe it's less about finding the ultimate truth, and more about embracing the freedom and growth that comes from that ongoing inquiry itself.